I'm giving up the 411 on Appetizers 101 because it's going to get your party started this season. This is Flying for Flavor. According to Wikipedia, an hors d'oeuvre, appetizer, or starter is a small dish served before a meal. Some hors d'oeuvres are served cold, others hot. Hors d'oeuvres may be served at the dinner table as part of a meal, or they may be served before seating. The key phrase I want to focus on today is small dish. Not necessarily when it should be served and how many hors d'oeuvres you should have before a meal, or if you're going to be having it at the dinner table, how to plate it. That's for another episode. This one's basically just going to be talking about hors d'oeuvres. If you are in Spain, you may call them tapas. If you are in Italy, you may call it antipasto. Regardless of what the name is, appetizers allow people to sample more than one dish, especially if you're serving more than one. And they should be flavorful enough to excite the palate. So not just a piece of bread, that's not really an hors d'oeuvre. Piece of bread with something on it, a little closer. So I just wrote a recent blog post, if you caught it, and it was all about balance. I have used that concept in creating delicious appetizers in my catering business. That's something that we became really well known for in our city here in Northern Ontario. And part of it was because the creativity behind some of the things that we created with my team was fun to make, fun to serve, and more importantly, fun to eat. So I'm going to go over a few things today. I can't go through every recipe that I've had stockpiled all these years in the business because we can't do that in this episode. It'll take way too long. And I do want to run through a few methods or themes that I have relied on with great success. I also want to go over some little rules and some quantity things and tips for you to organize how many appetizers you're going to serve, all that kind of thing. So basically just some inside info of things that have worked well for me in the past. Hopefully with all of this, you'll be able to use them as a basis for your own creations. Quick little news item though, I always want to start with little current events. Make sure you check out the Flying for Flavor Facebook page. There was a really fun article from ABC News. I guess some lady had an emotional support animal on a flight with her, not a dog, but a pig. And I have nothing against cute little potbelly pigs. I think they're adorable. But I guess the pig got out of control and there was causing problems on the flight. And so she was upset because they told her they couldn't have the pig on the flight. And anyways, it just brings me back to that previous episode we had about traveling with pets and how easy it is to register a dog or other animal as an emotional support animal. You don't even need signatures from doctors or anything else. And my only complaint is that I do believe there are people who need some kind of emotional support for proper reasons, but I do believe that there are always some people who are taking advantage of the system just for their own benefits. Like they may not like to put their little dog or put their animal in the in with the luggage in the down below in the plane. Sometimes it might just be, that the dog is more attached and doesn't do well on its own. There's always a lot of reasons, but if you want to learn more about that whole traveling with pets thing, feel free to go back to the previous episode. Just look under flyingforflavor.ca and scroll down till you see the episode entitled Traveling with Pets. Okay, back to appetizers. Now that we went on to pets. Okay, so here are my three main, I want to say categories that I kind of group most of my appetizers in, or at least the successful ones. So let's start off with miniatures. So if you take any recipe, even an entree, and really sit down and think about the components to it and how it's being served to you and how you can change it up to make it smaller, you can pretty much create anything into a 1 to 2 bite-sized portion. So here's a few examples. So I have this one recipe, it's called a little tourtière bite. It is essentially all the ingredients of a tourtière, so the ground meat with the seasonings and everything, but I put it in a little toast cup. So toast meaning I take a bread, roll it down so it's a little bit thinner, and then I push it inside of a mini muffin tin. Then you have the ground meats. And the cool thing is that once those are baked, you can actually freeze them, which is one of our themes for this season. Another one that I've done before that usually surprises people, sometimes to dismay. I like to serve warm soup in shot glasses. So no, not the plastic cheap ones that you get at the dollar store or whatever. I'm talking about really good shot glasses. I have some that are a little bit taller, different shapes, have different little patterns on them, which is really cute. And just any kind of a cream soup that you normally would want to make. I've done tomato soup before. I'm going to be sharing a really great recipe in this episode for a chestnut soup. There's a couple of other ones. You could do butternut squash, carrot and ginger. Take a look through my soups I think it's in my starters or appetizer section here on this website. And I will also include, of course, a couple in the show notes. But basically any kind of soup that is easy to drink, not too thick, and then just serve it in little shot glasses. It's a nice little warm treat for people as something to balance out all of the heavy bread-laden things that usually get served at cocktail parties. You can do fun little garnishes with them too. So the tomato soup, a little grilled cheese sandwich on them, that kind of thing. Speaking of grilled cheese, you can take a grilled cheese, cut it into wedges. You can mix up that grilled cheese, use different cheeses, you put some fruit or something in it. But basically any kind of a sandwich actually works if you cut it in small wedges. Crusts off if you want to make it pretty. Another little item I love to do are little mini stuffed potatoes. So take some miniature potatoes, make sure that they're pretty much boiled all the way through, and then top them just like you normally would a stuffed baked potato. So you could put chives, sour cream on them. You could go crazy with bacon and cheddar, but basically anything that you would normally do for a little potato bite. So that's my miniatures. So yes, of course, sliders and everything qualify in that. So think of some of your favorite entrees or think of some of your other favorite recipes and try to figure out how to miniaturize them so you still get the same flavors in a very small portion. So second theme would be, I call it starting with a base. So I like to call things like breads, flatbreads, and other doughs as a vehicle. So it's a vehicle for something else. Breads on their own are great. I'm a huge bread eater. It's kind of a family thing. But bread on its own is just bread. So I like to using as a base or a vehicle to carry another flavor. So let's look at some examples. So the first one would be crostinis or bruschetta. So that would be using baguette slices or other bread slices. You can use other breads besides baguette, by the way. And then you're going to add whatever toppings that you want. So this is where that balance blog post came in, where I was talking about having to mix and balance different flavors so that you get something interesting. And I don't usually recommend doing any more than 2 to 3 different toppings on crostinis. It gets to be a little overwhelming and difficult to eat. So some of the ones that I've done before that with great success, again, are that balance. Pea puree with bacon, goat cheese with an apricot chutney, cheddar with roasted plums. And then one of my favorites is a really creamy, either a buffalo or a mozzarella or something similar with some salty anchovies. So you can do that. One of my other favorite ones I had in Spain was warm sliced duck breast with a cool slaw on top of it. So it's got that hot and cold thing. If you want to learn more about how to mix those flavors and balance, just check out the latest blog post. I think it's called Striving for Balance. The other type of a base or bread that you can be using, basic flatbreads. Most grocery stores and bakeries now are selling thin, pre-cooked flatbreads ready to go. If you have the time to make the extra step and make your own dough, that's great. These are already pretty much rolled out even, standard size, and I believe sometimes you can even find them that are in a square rectangular format, so they're easy to cut into squares for serving that way. So flatbreads, you can basically use exactly the same rules that you did for the crostinis and the bruschetta, but just taking those same toppings and then putting them on flatbreads. You can either bake the flatbread and have cold toppings, or you can actually just top everything on it and then warm it or melt it in the oven. So either way, it works out great. Base dough. is my third example for this. Now, when I say a base dough, there are 3 different ones or other kinds. These are things that you almost wrap in or you stir ingredients into. So I'm thinking of phyllo pastry. I know people sometimes are scared about touching phyllo, but as long as you keep the rest of the dough sheets covered with a damp towel, not, when I say damp, I mean damp, not wringing out like I want it to be, just barely damp. That will actually keep them from drying out while you're working with the sheets that you are. So take a couple sheets off the roll or the package that you're using, put it on your work surface, use that, and then cover up the rest of them. So it's not that scary, but the great thing is with these base doughs, something like phyllo pastry or even puff pastry, by using up things in your pantry, using up things in your refrigerator, you can make up very quick appetizers very quickly. So here, give you a couple examples. You can do frozen spinach that you've defrosted and squeezed out. You can add that with cheddar and maybe some chilies. That can either get rolled into puff pastry, sliced and baked, so that becomes little spirals, or even in a palmier shape. You'll know what palmiers are. I'll put a picture on the show notes. The phyllo pastry, again, can be rolled into their little cigars or triangle shapes. You can basically take, I'm trying to think of some other ones I used to do. Spanish ones, you can do with like a tomato pestos with a different kinds of cheese. If you have just about any kind of other leftovers, something with cream cheese, if you happen to have a leftover cream cheese style dip, go ahead and roll that into a puff pastry or phyllo dough, and basically either slice and bake or make sure the ends are tucked in. You can get really creative. The phyllo dough and puff pastry can also be cut into squares and pushed inside mini muffin pans. Those can get par baked and you can use them as shells. So just by using those little doughs, different kinds of dough, and then classic pastry, of course, for mini tarts or mini quiches, any kind of dough like that is a good starting point to getting creative and wanting to have something that tastes familiar but looks different. So the last one I want to talk about today, if you've been following along on social media, I have posted a lot of picture of my classic gougere. Now, gougere, I'm going to spell that for you for those of you who never heard of it before. So it's Gougeres. So gougere are little savory puffs. It is made with a classic French style choux pastry. Choux is spelled Chaux. It is a very simple dough recipe that can be used on a savory or sweet side. And I've been using this one standard dough recipe, not just for making little bite-sized hors d'oeuvres, but I'll use it for a lot of things. So let me give you an example. So the standard recipe is 1/2 cup of butter, 1 cup water, 1 cup flour to 4 eggs. So you'll take the recipe I'll include in the show notes. So it's my Asiago and leek gougere, and you can use that same dough without the cheese or the leeks in it, and then you can use it for all different purposes. So you can change up the cheese and the herbs in it. You can do bacon bits with cheddar. You can, after they're baked, you can split them in half and use them as little mini slider buns because they're super light. You can make some kind of a light cream cheese style filling and actually fill them like you would a cream puff. And speaking of cream puffs, the choux pastry is exactly the same pastry used for your cream puffs, your profiteroles, and your eclairs. So you can omit the salt part of it on the savory side, and you can add in a touch of sugar, or maybe if you want to get fancy, a touch of vanilla into your dough. And once those are baked off, you can split them again for the profiteroles. That's with ice cream and a warm chocolate sauce. You can pipe in, if there's a little hole on the bottom or on the side, you can pipe in your sweetened whipped cream. You can fill them with custard and top them with the melted chocolate for an eclair. So there's all kinds of different ways with that same basic choux pastry dough. It's become a very handy thing, and there's nothing like toasting the new year in with a glass of champagne and a really cheesy, crisp gougere. Okay, so that was number 2 of our themes or categories. So we talked about miniatures, and we started with the bases. I'm going to call them vehicles, I guess, from now on. Okay, the third one is going to be my stack-em-ups. So this would be anything that you just basically stack up in a row. So this would qualify for skewers. You can have all the same thing on a skewer. You can mix up a skewer. So you could have pieces of marinated chicken with vegetables, throw those in either on the grill or in the oven. You can do other marinated meats and vegetables. You can do olives, cheeses, salamis, that kind of thing on little picks. Anything that basically can go on a skewer or a toothpick will work for this. And then another way that people don't always think about is you can use those, not quite the shot glasses, but maybe a smaller juice glass, or if you want to be fancy, martini glasses or anything with a stem. Layer different things in smaller portions inside the glass. I have done little portions of Caesar salad. I have done basically like a caprese salad with sliced tomato, mozzarella, basil, almost layered in a little small glass. That's easy to eat with just one of those little miniature forks. Anything that you can sort of stack up with some greens. Basically, you're making almost like a little mini tossed salad. And layered inside of a clear glass is really pretty. And it's a good way to mix in vegetables and brighter colors onto your appetizer spread so that you're not just basically, again, eating meat and bread and cheese. The usuals. So if you have any other suggestions of some of the recipes, I've included quite a bit in the show notes. Make sure to send them along and I'll share them with the rest of our listeners. Show notes today are, of course, at stephaniepichet.ca/flavor14. That's FLAVOUR 14. Right, ladies?
Yes.
Favorite appetizers, home, eating out?
For sure, Deep Woods bruschetta.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it's not even an appetizer. That's my main course because I can eat all of it in one sitting.
So good.
Okay, well, let's give a big shout out to our local Respect is Burning, obviously. So, Kate, Deep Woods bruschetta, have you been trying to duplicate it yourself at home, though?
I have.
Okay, with success?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
You're a natural.
Yeah.
You know what that sound is? It's time for Fly in My Soup. This is the time of the episode where I get to rant and rave a little bit. I know that I sometimes do it during the main part of the episode too. I know. But I want to have a formal one where I get to say something that's sort of been bugging me that I wanted to get off my chest. Okay, so this is I don't want anyone getting angry with me about arugula, but I'm really getting tired of seeing plated appetizers showing up with just as much arugula on the plate as anything else. And it's not that I have a thing against arugula, but if you're going to take a small appetizer, whether it's a baked item, whether it's a piece of quiche or whatever, and you're going to put it on a very big, massive plate, please don't fill up the rest of the space with lightly dressed arugula so that you can charge me $20 for it. I've been noticing it it seems to be a new thing now that you can take like the regular old bar style fried mushroom caps, put a little thing of dip beside it on a very long plate, drop it off in front of me, but half of the plate is arugula on it. So now it looks like it's the big fancy plated thing and they're still charging me almost $20 for this, even though normally those little hors d'oeuvre things are probably $10, $15 even with profit. So it's just one of those little getting annoying. Arugula, I get it. Arugula doesn't have to be topped on every steak, every item, every appetizer, every soup. There are a whole pile of other different types of garnishes out there, and it's tending to be a little bit of a default because everyone likes to see something green on their plate. I'm thinking arugula is becoming the new parsley, which I don't want it to be because parsley already has a bad reputation. I think people should give parsley a try. Anyways, rant over. Okay, and if you're going to go to a holiday party this season and you were told to bring an appetizer, what's your go-to recipe?
Cranberry walnut brie.
Ooh, fancy.
Brie, yeah.
Fancy.
Yeah.
I guess a good old spinach dip.
Just the cold spinach dip?
Yeah.
With pumpernickel?
A hot spinach dip
Oh.
with pumpernickel, but yeah, it's a good favorite.
Oh, maybe I'll have to get recipes from you guys.
Our go-to is slow cooker meatballs. Bite size with a nice barbecue sauce, honey garlic.
Everyone loves meatballs.
And sometimes my husband makes them from scratch, which they're even better, but that's time consuming, so.
Yeah, you can buy them already made. Don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Okay, just a little explanation on the soup in the shooter cups. You're probably wondering why I was saying people are dismayed. It doesn't matter how many things I catered over the years, and a lot of times to the same groups. Every time I'd send one of my servers out with a tray of shot glasses, I could hear the groans and the sad faces and the, oh, that soup kind of messages, because they seriously thought that I was showing up with actual shooters on the tray. That's what I meant by dismay. So just be prepared. So if you serve them, doesn't matter how much you wow them, they still think there's alcohol in there. But you know what? When you think about it, you could probably put some... Yeah, you're going to put alcohol in anything. Okay, so if you want to make a warm shooter with alcohol in it, be my guest. Okay, let's get on to my little rules. So this one you may want to write down some numbers. Okay, so my little rule of thumb, unless it is... Actually, no, not even unless. Let's just say my standard rule of thumb is 2 to 3 pieces per hour per person is usually a pretty good number. So that should work for a cocktail party or if you're having some appetizers before dinner. Now, cocktail party, I'm looking at that 5 to 7, 7 to 9, couple hours type thing. So let's use an example. So if you are going to host a small event from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. for 50 guests, that's 3 hours times 3 pieces per person times 50 people, which works out to 150 pieces for 3 hours. So that is 450 pieces maximum. So that's what I meant by the 2 to 3 pieces. Now you think 450 pieces for 50 people, you're like, oh my God. Well, it doesn't take long to get 450 pieces. So if you think about it, it's close to 480. And if you're thinking dozens, it's not that much and it goes fairly quickly. One of the reasons that for 3 hours you want to go maximum, depending on the weight or how heavy these hors d'oeuvres are, you may want to kind of trim it down a little bit. So here's the second part. So now that you figured out your maximum numbers that you need to have, now figure out things like the mix. So I mentioned those 3 different categories. Again, they were miniatures, the base breads, so that would be the baked ones like crostinis or flatbreads. And then I would do the last one, which is the stacking things. So let's just say you do 1 crostini recipe. For the miniature, maybe you do a soup shooter. And then for the dough thing or the skewers, you do 1 skewer. So that's 3 different styles of hors d'oeuvres. And then maybe now you go on and say, okay, but the next hour I'm going to do 3 different ones using that same format. One of the things, though, you just don't want to, unless you happen to have a whole lot of time, to prepare 9 different appetizers for that 3-hour period. Yes, you're going to wow your guests, but you are not going to be able to stand on your feet unless you have a big team behind you to make them. So now that you've figured out what your menu is going to be, now you need to figure out how you're going to serve them. So there's 2 main ways you can do it, and it is who is controlling what they're eating. You can either put them on trays and just walk around with a tray to offer something to your guests, or by individual plating. Those methods, I consider it that you are controlling how much and what they're eating. The other method is to have a buffet or set trays out for guests to basically help themselves. They are now the ones who are controlling what they're eating. So you have a choice of either doing you're controlling it by the trays or by plating, or they can control it, or you can do half and half. Now there's pros and cons to both. So the things, if you're going to do a half and half, or you need to make a decision on it, what I usually suggest to guests who are trying to, especially minimizing costs, put the cheaper, more filling items out like a buffet. Those are the things like little snacks or crackers or maybe some little flatbreads or your crostinis or things like that that don't cost a lot of money and that will fill your guests up. And you don't mind if they take more than 1. Things that are a little bit more expensive, have fancy ingredients or take longer to prepare, Those are the things that I would suggest putting on trays or plated per person so you can control the number of portions, bites, etc. I have seen at more than one large event where a gentleman gets excited to see my teriyaki beef skewers coming out, and he doesn't take one, he takes 2 handfuls of them. It's kind of well known that there's been a couple of events here in Sudbury that my staff can giggle at when they're listening to this, that we had to train them on how to pull the trays back because it was getting a little crazy. But things like that where guests are either very hungry or something, they are going to help themselves to as many as they possibly can for those heavier, more expensive things. The other things on buffets, this actually goes for beyond appetizers. Same idea when it comes to anything with seafood. I've made large rice dishes on a buffet that have different kinds of seafood in it, and it never fails. Someone picks out all the shrimp. It's just the way it works. So take your more inexpensive things and keep those for self-serve. Allow your guests to help themselves, and you just replenish as the evening goes on. And then the things that you want to control what they're having and how they're consuming it, or it's something that needs to be kept warm, those are the things that you basically control the portions or serve yourself. Make sense? Okay. Now, we're going to go on to temperatures. Of course, for health reasons, anything that is cold should be staying cold. Anything that is hot should stay hot. So for your cold items, a lot of times if you're going to have things on a plate, I would say take a plate with some crushed ice and put it underneath the other plate. Especially if they're the same plate size, no one's going to notice that there's a little bit of ice under there, especially if you need to hold it for a period of time. Another way, or that's one of those things that you can actually just serve small portions of. So this way it'll actually be served cold like it should be. Hot items. I always recommend those chafer dishes. If you don't have any on your own, you can rent them fairly cheaply from any of your local rental places. So either rent them, or if you find you're going to be entertaining quite a bit, go ahead and buy 1 or 2. They're really handy, and you can actually get inserts in them so that one dish can actually be divided into 2, if not smaller portions, so that you can put more than one thing in them. But they're super handy. The same place where you got the rental places, and there's a lot of stores, especially hardware stores, that do sell the fuel for them. So if you're planning to do a lot of entertaining, I always recommend getting those. There are things like these specialty hot plates that you can put hors d'oeuvres on to keep them warm on a buffet table. That's just one extra thing besides the chafer and everything else, and it makes things difficult. And as much as everyone likes the look of those warming things that have the little candles underneath, the candles don't keep it hot enough. So please don't think that the candles are taking place of the fuel for the chafers. Not the same thing at all. So now you've got your hot items hot, your cold items cold. The other thing I always suggest on your trays, try to put some kind of a doily on the bottom. If you don't like the look of the doilies because you think that they are too old-fashioned or whatever, come up with something different or use a napkin. But if you don't want to be cleaning trays on an ongoing basis, if you're swapping things out, it's just handy to have some kind of doily or anything on the bottom. It also something that paper will actually absorb any oil or grease, especially if you're doing fried items, and helps clean up spills pretty quickly. The other thing you're going to look at if you are doing a buffet setup, think of labels. So if you know what's in every one of the items that you're serving, it's not a big deal if you're planning to stand there and announce every time somebody goes near it. But it's easier to have little tags or signs explaining what's in it. And if you're going to have a large crowd, you're not going to be able to get to anyone and have to worry about allergies, people asking what's in this, what's this called. Regardless of what it looks like, someone's always going to ask you, what's in this? What is this? What am I eating? So to have little signs takes away all that extra step. And if you want to get really fancy, if you know that one of your guests, for example, may have celiac disease and can't have anything with wheat gluten in it, you can actually maybe put a little sticker or somehow color code your signs so that you can let your guests know when they arrive, I may not be at the buffet, but anything that is marked with green is good to go. So something like that is a little helpful for your guests, and it shows that you took that extra time to make sure that they didn't have to keep asking you all the time about what they can and cannot eat. So that goes with any kind of food allergies. The other thing that I'm always suggesting when you're setting up either a buffets or anything else, especially if you're going to be doing those skewers, because that's going to be one of your 3 categories, right? What to do with the skewers when you're finished eating. People tend to forget about putting some kind of a garbage, an extra plate or dish or something for picks that are used, whether it's toothpicks or those little cocktail forks, or if you were using a little plastic shot glass because, you had shooters or you had a chilled soup or something, that your little napkins, you need to have something for them to put on. One of the things that we used to do is that when we were serving skewers on a tray, we would actually have a dish next door to it with one used skewer in it, or a dirty one, just to show people where to put the other skewers. So same thing goes with toothpicks or anything else you're doing. Just have something nearby for them to put it in. And the last thing is make sure you have everything ready to go at the beginning of any kind of a buffet. So even if you're having an hors d'oeuvre buffet, things like tongs on every single item, even the ones that have skewers, depending on if you left a long enough tail of a skewer for someone to grab onto, they still may feel more comfortable using a set of tongs. Small plates are always handy for buffets, but if you're trying to control the amount that people are eating so they don't eat too much too soon, just by having cocktail napkins nearby, people will still put a few items on their cocktail napkins. But unless they're really being crazy and piggish, they probably won't put any more than a few items at a time. It saves people from piling on the small plate like it's their last meal. So that's another little cost saver suggestion for you. So that should give you your hot and cold. That should give you your temperatures for serving. I will include any other little tips between now and the time you're listening to this on Saturday, again on the show notes. So it's stephaniepichet.ca/flavor14. Thanks go out today to Julie, Caitlin, and Crystal from the Sudbury Chamber of Commerce, who helped out with today's Appetizer Confessions. And thank you to those who are not only listening and subscribing, but who have been kind enough to send along your kind words of encouragement via social media or email. It really means a lot to me. And as always, thank you to you for listening today to learn a little bit about appetizers. Doesn't always sound like an interesting topic for something like an audio podcast, but I'm hoping that some of the little tips and tricks that I've learned have helped you with your upcoming party hosting that I'm sure you'll be doing over the next month or two. So I'm wishing you a delicious week ahead, and we'll chat again soon.